I think it's been poorly managed. It's not best practice for Manchester United to let a player of Paul Pogba's quality get into his final year of his contract. Now, I know at times that's out of your hands, but as a football club, you could sell that player before it gets to that stage. And I think the fact that they've got the first ever director of football, John Murtough, he will make sure that this doesn't happen again. That will be one of his objectives with his job. Basically, they let him go for next to nothing many years ago. He made a name for himself at Juve. He came back for £89 million. To let that player then leave for nothing, I think that's poor.
How could it be managed better then, Trev, when you've got such divisive characters as Riola stirring the pot all the time? A player whose form sometimes makes you want him forever and then sometimes makes you never want him. How could it have been handled better?
Well, I think there's several ways it could have been handled better, and I think when you sell a player or you let a player go because he's asking for so much money as a young player, a teenager, and you realise because football's all about personalities, but about people, and I think Manchester United made their call on Paul Pogba as a person back then. They thought he was too much work
under a certain manager,
Yeah, so to start with, to bring him back to the club after knowing what you knew about him, I think that's where the first mistake was. I think then if you look on
people
from
change, Trev, though, don't they?
Yeah, they do, but Sir Alex Ferguson doesn't get many wrong, does he? And he allowed Paul Pogba to leave. So when you're bringing him back for that kind of money, you've got to be sure. For me, that was the wrong call, because you've seen the way that his antics have carried on throughout the years at Manchester United. I think when you're looking at his management as well, you know there's going to be serious problems.
Well, what do you think his antics are, Trev? Because when people like me say there's antics, I get a pile on. Now you're saying his antics. What do you mean by his antics?
Well, I think, listen, you look at any kind of maverick player, because Paul Pogba is a maverick player, and you look at any maverick player, and if they're doing the business on the pitch week in, week out, sometimes you have to swallow that. That's not the case with Paul Pogba. He's gone missing far too much. So for me, that's what I talk about when I talk about antics.
Okay.
All the other stuff, the social media and the commercial stuff,
it's
fine.
What it is.
It is what it is. But when you talk, the bread and butter of Paul Pogba is his performances on the pitch. They haven't been consistent enough for Manchester United, and to put an investment into a player of £89 million and then allow him to go for either nothing, which they will do if he goes in the summer, or it might even be worse than that. Listen, the negotiations are now. What are they going to pay Paul Pogba out of?
Do you think there's a casualty of Ole? And people say this is me with my tub thumping about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, but do you think this is a casualty of a manager that perhaps doesn't know whether to stick or twist and whether there's Arthur or Martha, and is trying to play all the ends against the middle, because sometimes Pogba will produce for him and other times he won't, and he hasn't got the courage of his conviction to say, right, I want rid of him and let's sell him and let's move on. Do you think there's an element of that?
I think there's a little bit of that, but I think basically, Paul, you look at Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and he's had too much to do. He's not had the support. And you look at the first director of football at Manchester United. Well, they've got the first director of football at Manchester United, okay? So they're way behind the curve regarding support for the manager. Now, if this John Murtough would have been in place a little bit earlier, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I don't think this situation occurs. But I think Manchester United have been slow, dragging their feet to get the staff behind, not just Ole, but in general, the way clubs have gone.
What I would say, listening to the two of you talking about Pogba, a lot of people listening to what we're talking about this morning on talkSPORT, a lot of people watching as well, incidentally, on YouTube and Facebook this morning. And there's a camp that's for Pogba. There's very definitely a camp that's not, Trevor. I mean, Barry Piper. Look, you talk about Riola. He's just moved Donnarumma to PSG along with other clients. But it fits your narrative in talkSPORT to slate Pogba when there's talk of him moving on. And then Phil Brown, a Manchester United fan of over 60 years, who says Simon's bang on. Pogba has great ability, which he wastes with his attitude, and therefore is never a great player. Prime example, against his Swiss for France in the Euros. France were 3-1 up. He was in control of the game. Then he starts to showboat. It allowed the Swiss back in. As a Manchester United fan of 60 years, I would be delighted to see him go.
But these are binary observations, right? The fact of the matter is, no one sat here slagging Pogba off.
No.
What both and I have Trevor have done is put him through a prism, and I think it's fairly obvious to say that as a world-class player, he hasn't punched at the level that you would expect him to. No. Where we pointed our guns is at Manchester United for being not across the scenario of dealing with Pogba, and the agent for being what he is. So the observation that we are slating Pogba is nonsense. No one slated Pogba. They've just given an objective opinion.
And I actually think Manchester United, from a football business perspective, they've bought a player in for £89 million. They're potentially going to let him go for nothing, or actually pay the player to go. Which from a
well, they won't pay the
business
player
point
to
of-
go, Trev, because there's no need for that, because the player has an economic value to a variety of clubs, not just PSG. So I don't see a Sanchez situation or something of that nature, but I certainly do see a situation where they can't command a huge fee for him, but also on the balance sheet side of things.
He's 28 years old, though, Simon.
I know,
And
but
if
we're
you're looking at
hold
Harry
on, Trev.
Kane.
We're talking
If
about
you're looking
100
at
million.
Harry Kane, who's 28.
We're talking about 100 million for
potentially
Harry
could go
Kane
for
at
100
28 years of age.
27, 28. He could go for 100 million. There's a lot of worth in Paul Pogba that they're not going to be able to get to.
Yeah, they're not going to be able. They're not going to be able
left
to
themselves in
capitalise.
this situation.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to capitalise on cash value for Pogba. But they're
Or
not
get
going
the
to
money
lose
back.
any money on him because they've already written him down over his contract. So he's on their balance sheet for next to nothing. But you're right, they're not going to get a lot of cash value for him. But, you know, that's assuming that everybody at Manchester United is an idiot and that John Murtagh is a character like something out of Life and Brian. He's going to come along and I'm the Messiah, right? Because that's not the case. Manchester United are not stupid. There is a reason and method to their madness, in the same way that there was probably a reason and method to the madness at Arsenal at times. Sometimes you just get yourself into very difficult situations with circles that you can't square. And Pogba is one of those circles that I think is very, very difficult to square.
Can it ever be squared though, Simon? I'm
No,
looking
I don't think so.
Manchester
No, I don't
United
think so.
fans getting in touch this morning saying it's already a sideshow. Already
No.
we've had enough. If Raiola is talking to PSG, I mean, Luke's a big Manchester United fan. Enjoying the show, guys, but sell him. Buy Ruben Neves, 35 million.
easy to
Then
say
you've got
that.
a player that we could do with at United, a deep-lying playmaker. That's exactly what Neves is. But United fans are getting fed up with it, Trevor, already.
Yeah, but it's easy to say that, Jim. Sell him. What if Pogba doesn't want to be sold? This is what I'm saying. Paul Pogba has now got all the power. Paul Pogba can say, I want to see out my contract.
Yeah, because
And
he'll
by the
believe
way,
he can get all that money in his contract if
Yeah,
he goes for
by
free.
and by the way, I'm injured as well, or I don't feel well, or I've got a mental health issue. He could say anything. This is what I'm saying. The player now has got all the power. And this shouldn't have been allowed to happen at Manchester United, one of the biggest football clubs in the world.
But in the great scheme of things, the only way it couldn't have happened is if Manchester United came to Pogba. If you're talking about 2 years out, so let's say they had the conversation 2 years ago, right, or a year ago, there would have still been the same dynamic in place. Because the problem with Pogba is that you never know what you're going to get with him. You'll never know what player's going to come back after a tournament or what player's going to turn up at the beginning of the following season. So you're constantly living in this world of he's going to be the Pogba that we all hope him to be.
Yeah.
You've got a manager that's slightly behind the eight ball in terms of a team that's not winning anything, and he's constantly under pressure from people constantly criticising him, me included. My influence is no significance, but the media are on him all the time. So with Pogba, 2 years out, you're always going to have this problem where Pogba, if he don't want to do something, we've got 18 months to go left on his contract. The problem is, what you really want Pogba to be doing is doing his job on the pitch and forcing Man United into a situation where 2 years out they want to offer him a new contract with inflated wages on it because he deserves it. Offering him a new contract to protect the investment is a real juxtaposition because he ain't worth a new contract, but you're giving him a new contract to protect the investment. So it's a real difficult one.
Trevor,
One thing that you've called for before, Simon.
Yeah.
If you put incentives in his contract and not a massive wage week in, week out.
You think Raiola would allow him to sign that?
Well, he wouldn't. Of course he wouldn't.
So that's the end of that conversation then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Thursday morning, 10 till 1. On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.